Citizens United comes down, and the court says corporations can spend. And the court also says, or the Court of Appeals says just a couple weeks later, in a case that the Center for Competitive Politics brought, along with the Institute for Justice, called SpeechNow.org versus the FEC, the Court of Appeals in a 9-0 decision says you can't stop people from pooling their resources in unlimited amounts. That's what creates essentially super PACs. Now you remember the reaction. The Democratic Party flipped out. The same week that Citizens United came down, they lost the special election for Ted Kennedy's seat in Massachusetts. And I think at that point it dawned on leading Democrats for the first time that, hey, the idea that this is going to get more popular doesn't seem to be working. We could really be in trouble in the next election. And of course, Democrats have this view that big business is always behind Republicans, which isn't really true, but that's sort of their idea. They envision Citizens United with Exxon spending $1 trillion or something, these ridiculous kind of zombie apocalypse scenarios. But that's what they believed, and they saw that Kennedy lost the seat, and they freaked out. They said, we've got to stop this. How can we stop these people from expressing their views? They introduced something called the Disclose Act in Congress. Chuck Schumer, when he introduced this, the lead sponsor, said the purpose of this bill is to deter the other side. He said that, quote, the deterrent effect should not be underestimated of forced disclosure on people. This is because it combines with activism, increasing activism, which John's group has been subject to repeatedly, of left-wing organizations to simply harass, vandalize, boycott donors to conservative causes. And we could go at length into that. I won't do that, but that's a growing issue. Media Matters, David Brock's group, has intentionally made clear in fundraising pitches their intention to expose donors so that other left-wing groups and they can organize boycotts of these conservative donors and try to get them to stop speaking. All right. So the goal became, when the Disclose Act was defeated, was to force these groups that are operating under 501c4 to operate under 527 again, where their donors would be disclosed. And hence, you get the slowdown of 501c4 applications. We're not going to approve you as a 501c4 because you could do all the same stuff as a 527, but then we'd be able to get your donors released, and you would be subject to potentially official and almost certainly unofficial harassment in the future. Meanwhile, within this time frame, numerous Democratic congressmen and senators wrote repeated letters to the IRS urging them to investigate conservative groups, in some cases by name, as to whether they were in fact meeting their tax status. This should not be forgotten. The president himself repeatedly talked about the possibility that these groups were funded by foreign money and such allegations like that, totally unsubstantiated. Again, the Center for Competitive Politics has a wonderful timeline, interactive timeline of this on our website at campaignfreedom.org. If you really want to see all these speeches when they were made and actions taken by the IRS and letters from member of Congress telling the IRS to crack down on these conservative groups and so on, it's a wonderful resource, and I encourage people to use it. Now, I need to wrap up here, so let me just make a couple of points about the arguments that are made about whether these groups need to register under 527. First, as Cleta and John pointed out, generally speaking, they probably don't. And moreover, the idea that they should be examined before they've actually done anything seems backwards compared to how we operate normally. Secondly, we need to remind ourselves that there is no tax break for these groups. One of the things that's often being said by those who are defending the IRS is, well, these groups get a tax break. We need to make sure they're complying with tax status. But they don't get that. Bill Nelson, for example, the senator from Florida, actually said to the IRS, he yelled at him at a hearing, how could you allow these tax breaks funded by the taxpayer to be spent on these political campaign expenditures? But there were no tax breaks. The amount of revenue going into the government doesn't matter at all with what category these groups are put in. And this has been picked up by liberals in the media. Jeffrey Toobin had a big piece in the New Yorker earlier this year in which he noted, in return for the tax advantage, groups must refrain from traditional partisan political activity. First, it's wrong. They don't have to refrain from it. It just has to be less than half of what they do, not their major purpose. But second, they don't get a tax advantage for it. So we've got this kind of problem going on. The left knows this. They have. This is no secret. MoveOn.org is a 501c4 organization. Oh, they're not political, no. People for the American Way is a 501c4 organization. NARAL Pro-Choice America is a 501c4 organization. The Brady Campaign for Gun Control is a 501c4 organization. No Democratic senators have ever written, to my knowledge, a letter to the IRS saying, we really would like you to investigate this Move On organization. It seems to me they're doing a lot of pretty political stuff. They're not interested in that. This is clearly a partisan action. And an atmosphere is created when the President of the United States and high-ranking members of the majority party in the Senate are making these kinds of allegations that these groups are operating in violation of the law. And again, on our timeline, just specific quotes actually making that allegation very specifically, not by implication. And so you naturally are going to get a bureaucratic agency that's going to say, okay, this is the important government policy at this point in time. So even if there were not any possibility of, foul motives by any employees at the IRS, okay, and, if we gave the IRS every benefit of a doubt, at least to all of the individual employees and their willingness to do their job in an even-handed, nonpartisan manner, what you're going to have is when you put the IRS into this position, right, and you have leading members of Congress and the White House consistently saying, this is important, you got to deal with this, these people are violating the law, you are going to get partisan investigations that will take place over time. Now I want to conclude with one final quote that I think is interesting, because one of the things the statute for 501c4s says that groups that are 501c4s must be engaged exclusively in social welfare activities, right? Now social welfare activities is not defined by the statute. And one question one might have is, what is a social welfare activity? I liked Representative Javier Becerra, a Democrat from California, who noted that 501c4 status should be reserved, quote, for something good, not groups that are in business to do politics. Now, this is a man who spent pretty much his entire adult life in political office, in elected political office, right? And I think it brings up, a key point here. Even if one were to accept that argument there that is made, that these groups must be engaged exclusively in social welfare, why isn't social welfare promoting the public good through political action, educating the public about candidates and issues? And this goes to the big picture of campaign finance reform and now how we're using the IRS to try to get there, which is this attack on political activity as something that is inherently bad, self-serving, and something you should be sort of ashamed of. And so in this way, the IRS scandal comes back full circle with its origins in the campaign finance movement. Thank you.